Well, hi everybody, and welcome to the channel again. And today we've got our patrons. This is one of our patron Zoom sessions, and we have a guest joining us today. What we're going to do is we're going to have a chat with our guest, and at the end, afterwards, the last part of this Zoom session, I'll turn off the recording so that won't be put on YouTube or anything. And if anybody has any sort of more personal questions, libelous questions, as Keith said a minute ago, that you want to ask, then you can ask those without knowing that it's not being recorded. But we are recording this at the moment, and this will be open to all the patrons to be able to see this. And so will if we put it on YouTube as well. Right, today's guest is Keith Baldwin. He may look a bit older than me, but him and me were together when we first joined a circle. We joined a circle with Peter Close, who was a medium. We'll tell you a bit about him as we go along, and also Bill Landis. And we're going to have a chat, me and Keith, and take your questions. And talk about what it's like when we first got started as mediums, what our first impressions were of when we went to a circle, how we developed, how long it takes, the pitfalls we found, the best things we found, how we took it later on in our lives and things like that. And I think it would be very interesting for any of you who want to know how to get started. And also for questions, of course, from any of you that are already developing your mediumistic abilities or just your early psychic abilities, you can ask Keith and get another sort of angle on it to the way I describe things. So I'm going to introduce Keith Baldwin. Keith, you there, Keith? Is there anybody there? He's gone. I said he looked older than me. Keith?
Sorry, I forgot to unmute. I do apologise. You youngsters with all this technology, honestly.
So this is Keith. Hiya, Keith.
Hiya.
We've known each other for many years, but we haven't spoke for some years, actually.
No, we haven't, no.
No, I mean, it's been, I don't know, 5 years, ages since we've spoken face to face.
Yeah, it's been a long time.
And yeah, so I thought it would be quite interesting for people if we sort of have a chat about how we sort of got involved with spiritualism, because I know from my point of view, I was certainly way from any idea of ever wanting to be a medium. For me, it was kind of something that came to me out the blue. Well, although I developed psychic abilities through my life, the idea of doing something within something like spiritualism, which is close to a religion, I would have been quite against what I felt. And I know that when you started and sort of kind of come to quite an interesting background, didn't you? You were into the motorbikes and things and all that type of thing originally, weren't you?
Well, I mean, yes and no. I certainly was pretty much around the time, I think. But I was, I think at the time there'd been a number of years where a lot of things had changed quite dramatically, I guess, in life. Really, my parents had moved away, so I had to fend for myself, you know, sort of at a pretty young age, really, I suppose 17 or 18, and then I was pretty much having to fend for myself. And then my mother passed when I was 20, which was obviously a very, very life-changing moment. And the whole world changed. Up to that point, and I think what Craig's alluding to, I was a fairly happy-go-lucky, carefree person with a really good job and enjoying all the trappings that come with, you know, having a good wage and so on, motorbikes and all sorts of nefarious activities. But then, you know, there are things that happen in life that just have a profound moment, and they change the way you see the world. And like Craig, really, I mean, I was never really actively looking to become a medium. I wasn't at all. The first time I set foot into a spiritualist church, which was a very famous one in Wimbledon, near where I was living at the time, I went there purely to give a lift to my landlady, and one thing led to another, and I got asked, why didn't you come in rather than sitting out there? And I was a little bit apprehensive about it, but I did go in. And to cut a very long story short, the medium demonstrating on this particular day was Bill Landis, who was, Grace just mentioned, was a part of the development circle that we were members of, and he asked to speak to me afterwards. It was a bit overwhelming, really, because he just after this, so he said, can I speak to you after the service? Could you? Yeah, okay. What have I done? and he was asking me to join a development circle. I didn't even know what a development circle was, let alone what the mechanics of these things were. So yeah, quite a bizarre start.
Yeah, and very, very similar to me, really, because I mean, I had no intention of joining a circle at all. I mean, I got very interested. I got very interested in mediumship. I met Doris Stokes, was the last medium I'd seen, really. And I'd never been in a spiritualist church, but I had a private reading with Doris Stokes, and she, well, you know, I've written about it and things. It completely changed my view of things. And then I had a private reading with Peter Close, because Bill Landis and Peter Close both work together, and they run this circle. Bill would run the first stage of the circle, and then Peter would take it over and do the second stage. So as you got more advanced, you could jump up a notch, as it were. And for me, it was exactly the same as you, Keith. I think in many respects, the fact that we kind of didn't intend to be mediums, yeah, kind of must have been a bit of a help for both of us, really, wasn't it? Because it's a bit like power, isn't it? I mean, if you want to give power to someone, the best people to give power to is the people that don't want that power, because they might use it more better. But but those people that I think that sit in circles because they've been watching mediums on television, for example, nowadays, particularly, I want to be like that. I want all the glory, you know. I think for you and me, it was both the same. And we weren't looking for anything, really. In fact, I was personally quite resistant. I don't know about you.
I think I was too. I think both of us at times were told to relax, almost, you know, relax. Will you calm down? Will you take a chill? Because I think the one thing that we had in common, and you know, obviously I realised in later years as our friendship developed, was that we were looking deeper than just wanting to be really good mediums. That wasn't the most important thing. That might not make sense. Why would you be in a development circle? But again, we were both reluctant students, I suppose. And I was at that time questioning the world. And even in the development circle, I was interested in where the energy was coming from, where the messages were coming from, how they were coming, how we could tap into them, etc., rather than just focusing on how can I get really detailed information and so on and so forth. If that makes sense, there was something deeper about the world and about the eternal world, or the universe, if you like, that I was more looking towards. And I think I saw that in Craig. I suppose I saw Craig as a person that was very insightful and wouldn't. Neither of us would just take anything on face value. We liked to explore that. We wanted to taste a bit of that and see, you know, almost to really delve into that deeper and find out more about it.
Yeah, I think that we were both doing that, weren't we, Keith? We were both kind of both rebels in a way. Yeah. We wouldn't conform to whatever they told us to do.
No.
And also both questioned everything, because you know, you have to question everything like that. And I think I was like you, looking for much deeper. I wanted to go, this means something really significant to me, that this is possible. And I had to, in a way, had to prove it to myself. Because you and me, we were both ones what I would call the most kind of, how can I say, evidential mediums. We were always pushing a little bit more for the names and real details. And you were very good at that. Both of us, I think, were very good at getting the real little detail. Really, not so much to prove it to the other person in circles, certainly, but to kind of prove it, you know, now what if I say, did you know a parrot with some green boots? And the person goes, oh, yes, that was a picture on my wall. You think, how did I know that? It's proven it to me that what I am getting is not my own imagination, and not someone making things fit, but it was what Peter told us, I think, most of all, because he was a policeman, to get evidence. Was that the same for you, Keith?
Yeah, I think so. And I think that one of the things that came across to me was the importance of using our personality, not trying to stifle it, not trying to emulate somebody else, but just totally being ourselves. And I know that when I started to visit different spiritualist churches or other places where there'd be a medium visiting, as you started to see a bit of a pattern where people were emulating their favorite medium of the day. But what a great shame and what a great disappointment, because Craig and I are in many ways very, very different, but our approach to opening ourselves up to spirit was very, very much the same. And I think there's a certain element of kind of that standing on the edge of the cliff, and rather than staring downwards, staring outwards and just trusting that you're not going to fall. and going with that moment. And I think that, I mean, that made for some very interesting times, even when we were students and we were wheeled round as a group to different churches. Most of the group, if I remember this clearly, were terrified and petrified, except Craig and I, who could not wait to get out there and see what happened, because it was all about the experience. It wasn't kind of about us, it was about the experience, because every time I felt that we went out there, we learned something new. We learned something that we didn't know before.
Yeah, I think a couple of points there, Keith. Absolutely. Don't imitate. I think that's something we should all take on as a motto. Don't imitate others. And a lot of mediums tend to do this. They try to be Gordon Higginson. They try to be Doris Stokes. They even pick up the same phrases, for example, that Doris Stokes and people use, and use them on platform. I've seen people do. And yes, be yourself. Because I think this is what you have to be as a medium. You were very much, I think, aware that, don't try to shoehorn yourself to be a spiritualist or shoehorn yourself into conforming all the time. I think the best mediums tend to do that, don't they? I think they tend to be a little bit of a maverick. I think if you look at most of them through the history of spiritualism, and they tend to be a little bit eccentric quite a lot of the time, I think, and usually have a pretty good sense of humor, because you can't do this sort of thing if you and I think also risk taker, because we, like you say, when we first went out there and we first had to stand up in front of an audience. I'd never been to a spiritualist church before, by the way. I'd never visited a spiritualist church. So the first time I ever went to a spiritualist church was actually to stand on the platform, because I didn't know what it was, and I think you have to have a bit of a sort of a reckless almost attitude to do that sort of thing. Did you find the same? We're talking now more like when we got started.
Yeah, I think so, because I think that when we first started in the circle, where you're meeting in a room and you get to know people, you've got that initial awkwardness and nervousness, although I did click with Craig pretty early on. But then it becomes kind of like your own little private friendship group, and it's really, really nice. We noticed the difference when it then came to actually getting out and then going around to the halls or churches to present. That was a very different moment. That was really, if you really mean this, you had to really mean it. You had to really be wanting to put yourself through this process, because there you were about to be put up in front of, a church full of people, and however sympathetic they were, nobody wants to stand in front of a large group of people and fail and fall and look bad, because there's a part in all of us, really, isn't there, where we worry about what people will think. We worry about maybe getting something wrong. It wasn't something that terribly bothered me, because like I said, I found the whole process an opportunity to explore something new, because every single person's different. Every single, the atmosphere in places was always totally different. But it was a moment where you had to just forget all of your shortcomings. You'd sit there trying to get yourself as calm as possible, so there weren't things coming into your mind that might detract you and all sorts. And I remember sitting there trying to just switch off when someone before me was speaking, just because I didn't want to catch hold of phrases that might, because we were young, we weren't so trained in the early days, and I think we were probably so sensitive at the point when we went. I don't know if it's the same for you, Craig, but certainly in the early days, when you went on the platform as that learning group, you were so sensitive to everything that you could pick up everything, including maybe your own colleagues, the other students' nervousness and anxiety. So you had to just come out there with a reckless, almost an abandonment of your thoughts. I know we're getting almost into something philosophical here, but almost to abandon your own thoughts, everything of the day, and just try and be as absolutely open as you were, and then just open your mouth and trust in what's going to come out of your mouth.
Yeah, I think that comes when you're younger too, doesn't it, really? Because
yeah, absolutely.
you got less. I think we were lucky to start so young. I mean, we were in our early 20s when we both started, and you kind of had that reckless abandon, where a lot of people would be scared to death of saying something kind of perhaps a bit too personal to someone, or say something that seems a bit outlandish, and worried about how they'd look when they say bad things. In fact, the hardest part, I thought, was actually in the circle itself, when we would start off, and the first time we did things like psychometry, because we started, didn't we, by first of all learning kind of psychometry, then we learned to sort of link with each other, and then we eventually learned how to talk. We were asked to actually give an address. Peter would give us a topic. I remember mine was the Brotherhood of Man. Next week, Craig, you're going to just talk about the Brotherhood of Man. I thought, oh, okay, what's that mean? It's banned, you know, and you just talk as well. So what I'm doing now actually came from that circle, really, because I learned to speak as well. Speak kind of not from, because I never make it when I speak on YouTube, and when you speak, I'm sure it's the same, Keith. You're not thinking it out, you just say it, you know, because it kind of a beginning, middle, and an end is there in your mind, because we were taught to do that in the circle of how to present ourselves. And it served me very well when YouTube came along all these years later. So has it helped you in all sorts of areas of your life, and how's it helped you with your mediumship, and what are you doing with your mediumship now, Keith?
To be honest, and that's, if you remember, there was a time when I was really booked quite regularly, and particularly around London, the home counties, and talking in churches, and I found it all a bit disparaging after a while, because I retained this interest in going deeper. I didn't just want to be going out and able to give accurate information. I mean, that's obviously the desire of each medium, but I wanted to look further than that. I guess I wanted to, you know, I don't want to bring in topics like enlightenment and stuff like that, but I had a greater interest in what the afterlife actually is, not just the sort of fantasy ideas of the beautiful place, but what it's like, what spirit's existence is like, what spirit's role is, because you know, I'm absolutely clear, and I think I always have been, probably since before going to the circle, of the spiritual world as a reality. You know, I find it hard to understand how people will deny that there is a spiritual realm. It seems bewildering to me, because of the just the myriad of experiences that I have, and I'm sure everyone here could probably attest to the same thing. But I've explored other religions. I certainly, some years later, became interested in Christianity, more the I don't want to say the religion of, because I've never been religious in my life, and I don't intend to start now, but certainly in things like Christianity, and how that faith developed, where it came from, and where you can see spirit and the spiritual realm meeting in there, but as well as Islam, and as well as other faiths and so on. So I think I work now in, I'll say child protection and leave it at that. But interestingly, my senses, my understanding of people is, I think, so heightened that I'm by no means entering into a sort of a clairvoyant arrangement or mediumistic arrangement. But in the same way that we would sit there in the circle before we started, and opening up chakras and going through a meditative process to get ourselves as calm as possible, which has changed over the years, and it may well be that, you know, Craig's changed the way he gets himself in the right position and state to do things. So have I, and I find that everything I do now, I consider myself to be doing it, hopefully more in touch with the spiritual realm, more able to connect with people, because ultimately we are all spirit anyway.
Yeah, absolutely, like me, really. I mean, I see mediumship as just a small part of it. I see being a psychic is just a small part of it. I mean, people sort of, because I've done the profession, I mean, and people have all sort of see you as a psychic and a medium, but I think it's more than that, isn't it? I mean, I think what these things do is what they should do is they should open you up, first of all, to a philosophy of life, but even further than that, to a way of living, you know. And like you say, I look at it now, it's all God, it's all divine. Everything that we do, every word we say is all part of a divine cosmic plan. as it were, you know. And like you, I'm not really religious, because when people say to me, you know, do you believe in God? I have to say, well, you have to, what do we mean by that word, you know? And then it takes it on from there. And but really everything is divine. Everything is part of this divine consciousness, this perhaps universal mind, whatever we want to call it. We can put all sorts of terms to it. But I think mediumship, for you and for me, I'm sure it was with both of us, was the door into this understanding. I won't say other world, because it's this world, but into this understanding of a new way of being.
Yeah, 100, absolutely 100%. I think that to tie yourself down, to label yourself is limiting. And my understanding of God has never been in any way, shape or form as a person when people talk about God. And believe me, I don't incidentally scoff or pour any scorn on any person's faith or religion, because I think, you know, as somebody once said, whatever gets you through the day. But understanding what God is, I cannot see God as a human-like character sitting on a cloud playing a harp and making decisions on a daily basis. It doesn't make sense. I see God in everything. I see God in you know, the friends and family I know. I see it in nature. I see it in so many different things. I see it in art. I see it in all sorts of creative processes. I see some sort of God thing. And you know, it may not sound a satisfactory explanation to people, but I had a sense of God from as young as I can remember, but no means to articulate what God looked like, sounds like, or actually is in form. And I'm okay with that. I don't mind that. It's enough to know that for me that there is, if you like, a divine intelligence, a divine creator, whatever you want to look at it, than to absolutely be able to identify and explain that to somebody else. I don't think it's the most important thing for me in my life.
I think because you got a spiritual side, Keith, it's because that's why your mediumship was so brilliant. I mean, we used to kind of, in a nice way, sort of almost compete with each other to see if we could outdo each other with our messages, didn't we? See if I could give a little bit more. Keith got the surname, I've got to get the surname, and I've got to get the mother's surname, maiden name. You know, we would almost over. And I think I think the mediumship, if you've got the true spiritual side as well, and you put that together with mediumship, I think that's when you start to get proper quality stuff. If you can get that ego out the way and know that what you're doing is a service, it makes a difference. But I was going to say, I think it would be nice now we start bringing a few people in, if anybody wants to sort of add your thoughts or ask your questions of Keith, or sort of just join in the discussion here now. So don't know if any of you've got anything you'd like to ask.
Yeah, Keith, have you ever managed to change anybody's mind about the afterlife? You know, you said you can't understand why, you know, more people don't believe in the afterlife. You know, there are some people who just say, oh, that's rubbish. People like my husband, who actually saw spirits, he would actually see them. You know, he'd see a dog in here, and occasionally I saw it as well. And then he'd just say, no, it's rubbish, there's no such thing as the afterlife. When you die, you die. Have you ever managed to change anybody's mind who's come to you with that sort of perspective?
Absolutely. Just as a point of clarity, I mentioned the spiritual realm, that it was my that people won't accept there is a spiritual world, that we are just, you know, a physical world, an animal on a planet that by chance was here, and that's it. I guess the short answer is yes, but for me, I think that I'm not satisfied. I would never be satisfied. And again, I this is probably something as well that I would have in common with Craig. I would be satisfied that if I'd given a piece of evidence to somebody, that in itself was enough for them to go away and have their mind changed about the afterlife. Because there's a lot about the afterlife we don't know, and sometimes an opportunity is missed when, certainly in private readings, when I did private readings one-to-one, I enjoyed the fact that you could go a lot deeper and have a conversation that you couldn't easily have from a platform or from a stage, and that you could talk wider about some of the things that you might be sharing and whatever, and often that's where some really detailed information can come through that just can't really be manufactured and can't be by chance. Just stepping to one side on that point for the moment. sometimes, in fact, all too often, I'm afraid, you'll see people who are demonstrating in a hall or in a church. They hit on something and then stay there because it's safe ground. Now, I would never, and I know that Craig didn't, because I worked with Craig. I saw Craig do what he did. He would never just sit on something like that. He would still be just keeping himself wanting to pursue something that Spirit wanted to say to this person. You know, because it's not like you're not there just to make people feel better. You're there to communicate from Spirit in whatever they want to get across. When somebody comes to speak afterwards and says, "That was incredible. I don't know where that came from." That for me is the moment at which we can have a much more deeper, meaningful conversation. And that generally would be the time at which somebody may well start to, if not change their mind, certainly open their mind to another way of thinking. I remember once having this conversation with a Methodist minister. You can't get anybody more staunch than a Methodist minister. He'd been a Methodist minister all his life. And during the actual service, and he'd actually gone there as a team of them to pray for protection over all this satanic goings on as he saw it in his church with a little group of people. And he was one of the person, unknowing to me, unknowing at the time, I came to, and I have no recollection of whatever I said, but he came up to me afterwards. I want to speak. He said, can I have a word with you? Yes, sure. He said, how did you know those things? Well, I didn't know those things. Those things were given to me to share with you for whatever reason, for you to those whatever reason. And it completely blew his mind and made him completely rethink his own views on eternity and on what happens when the physical body dies and what happens to the soul and the spirit. I mean, that was one notable moment. It would be difficult, Pat, and it's a great question. It would be difficult for me to sort of know, because often there isn't a follow-up after you've given a message to somebody. Craig, I mean, what would you think on that? It's a good question.
In terms of convincing someone there's an afterlife?
Yeah, in terms of convincing somebody.
Some people won't be convinced. I mean, I remember having some arguments with vicars sometimes, and I'd say, you've been dabbling in Christianity. I'd always get it in first before he'd say you're dabbling in spiritualism. And some people got a completely closed mind to it, which I think is a great sadness, because I remember we both knew Vi Kipling, didn't we, as well, because we worked together in the chat rooms as well. And Vi used to tell us about Cosmo Lang, who was the Archbishop of Canterbury some while ago, and they did a survey in the church to say, is spiritualism bad? And basically the church more or less came around to the idea of that it's okay, it's not doing any harm, it's helping people, and it was completely rejected in the end. So it was completely rejected in the end. So which was a great sadness, because I think it's not all this. What we've got as a talent is something that can help the world and can help people to gain a greater understanding, and perhaps get to the understanding that all religions have one common denominator. They all have very, very similar things in common. And proving an afterlife to someone, really, well, we do that with mediumship, but you only need to look at all the other things out there. You need to look at things like near-death experiences. I mean, there's some real proof of an afterlife. You look at dreams people have. You look at crisis apparitions. You look at the whole history of this, and you take it all together as a whole, and it's pretty self-evident that there's plenty of evidence for an afterlife, which really we mustn't put our beliefs in front of it to stop us getting to the truth. My attitude towards all teachers, because I've followed the Eastern ways very much, but I will say push even the gurus out the way, push Jesus out the way, push all of it out the way, because ultimately your understanding of the nature of existence of the Godhead has to be between you and a direct experience. Nobody can be enlightened for you. You have to be the one that does it, So, and this is, but religions are all there, fantastic things, which should be mechanisms to help us to get to that point. There should be encouragements and help us, because other people have been down this path. Other people have had the same questions that we all get about, what happens beyond death, and what is the meaning and purpose of human existence, and they can all support us. But unfortunately, everybody gets it all muddled up and uses it all in the wrong way, and turns what should be something to help us into something that doesn't. So it's obvious there's an afterlife if you look at it properly. But if you're looking at it through dark glasses, this is the only way I'm prepared to view the world, then you'll never see it. That's my thoughts.
Yeah. Does that answer your question, Pat?
Yes, it does. Thank you very much. Yeah.
You're welcome.
Yeah.
Have we got any other comments from anybody or input that you'd like to suggest? That's good.
Our local Methodist minister used to look a bit scared if you asked him awkward questions about the Bible. You know, how come Methuselah lived so long and all this sort of thing. But eventually he fled to Somerset and he didn't leave a forwarding address. I don't know if it was my fault, but yeah, he used to look a bit worried if you asked him about the Bible. And,
into the dark depths of Somerset, eh? We were there yesterday.
Somerset.
Yeah.
Somerset. Here, my lovelies. Well, you're down in Cornwall.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
It is a shame that many people who are involved in religions, and I've spoken to people in lots of different religions, as I'm sure Craig has, who hold. Who do have an open mind, believe me, that you're not all people who are staunch Christians or Methodists or Muslims or whatever are all closed-minded. That's just not the case. But there are some, and I always feel for them, because you're limiting yourself. In some cases, it's cultural. I wasn't brought up in a family that had any faith. So I don't mean in a faithless rabble, but I meant a family that didn't follow or practice a faith. And I'm glad of that in a way, because I was allowed to grow up and develop an open mind and an open way of thinking, to be non-judgmental. And I don't consider that I have the answer. I would never get into an argument about, well, my religion's better than yours, as does go on, because it's so meaningless. There's a lot of things about creation. There's a lot of things still about evolution. There's certainly a lot about the spiritual realm and the afterlife that we don't know about. But just because we don't know about it doesn't mean there isn't an explanation and an answer. And that's what makes me salivate and get excited about searching for it, as it clearly does with Craig. That's why we want to explore things that we've not explored before, because it's a way of opening your mind to something new. It's exciting. I love the simple realization that there are not two people on the entire planet who are identical. And even if you take identical twins into account, they're not absolutely identical. That's incredible, isn't it? I mean, that is phenomenal. So you've got all of these individuals with individual experiences. And I think that just makes the world a very, very fascinating place, and must make the wider universe and the spiritual world even more exciting. So how, again, probably coming back to what you were saying, Pat, earlier, how can anyone not be excited by it or want to explore that realm?
I think it's interesting. I'm talking, and made me think, actually, when you talk about people with their resistance to these things. I mean, sometimes you think it's all limited to religion, but there's another whole movement, like the psychop movement, that is actually actively trying to discredit all the type of things that we do, and also the rationalists. You know, when I've come up against the likes of James Randi and Richard Dawkins and that, you know, and all those people. One of the interesting things I found, Jane and I went to what was called the Magic Castle in Los Angeles, which is a sort of a place where all the magicians, all the conjurers type magicians go. And they've even got their own secret seance room there that James Randi in the past is used to debunk spiritualism. And actually we got talking to all the magicians circle, and you know, a lot of them, but all of them more or less were saying, well, we don't really like being represented all the time by James Randi, because most of us here actually do think what the type of thing that you mediums do is actually true, because we can't explain it, you know, with our normal ways anyway. And just because we can mimic it doesn't mean to say that it's false, you know. And I thought it was very interesting that I thought this is just like being in a church, you know, because these guys have their some other people have preconceived ideas. And just because you get a few loud voices like the Richard Dawkins of this world, like the James Randi and people like that, doesn't mean to say that that everybody believes that sort of thing. I think the general people in most religions are not as staunch, not as extreme as we might see in Islam, in Christianity, in extremist Hinduism, even in the Buddhist faiths. You know, there's all sorts of people that have these blinkered ideas, and people seem to think they represent the common belief, but it's far from it, in my opinion.
I'll tell you what I've always wondered. If any of James Randi's family, if they were ever interested in the afterlife, if they ever managed to contact him through a medium, whether he would say, sorry, I was wrong.
Well, they've been trying to do the same thing through Houdini. Every Halloween, Lynn Gester-Swart, who's who I've also will get on here at some point in the future again. She goes and does it at the Magic Circle. And of course, he never comes through because there's no proof left to give to prove Houdini. Even though his wife, the wife of Houdini, said that Houdini had come through a medium, and then the whole Magic Circle and all of them jumped on it and said, "No, can't be true, can't be true." You know.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that the whole thing about truth as well is that some people will want to divine truth. There are different religious denominations that believe that they own the explanation of what truth actually is, but truth can only be what it is, not what someone else decides what it is, if that makes sense. Truth is truth. It can't be something that either I call truth or Craig calls truth or anybody calls truth. Truth is truth. And I think that we live in a world where we want to find answers to things. We believe that there are clever people out there that any difficult question you've got, they'll answer. But it's not the case. It's not, even whether it's scientists, whether it's people interested in things of a spiritual or supernatural nature, it's not the case. So my mother died when I was 20, or just before my 20th birthday. I've never had a particularly good I've never had a message that I've considered particularly authentic from her. However, I've regularly felt her presence, and I regularly get that moment of inspiration that could only be my mother. So of course someone else can easily say, oh well, yeah, you would say that, wouldn't you? But I don't care if someone disbelieves me or not. I know it. So there's no doubt at all in my mind. Like Pat, you're saying about with your husband, he would see things or whatever. He doesn't need someone to tell him that. He knows that. And that's relevant. Because we don't know the answer to something doesn't mean there isn't an explanation. The scientific view, of course, will be to come up with a theory. And of course, we might have a view on it. I mean, and if we talked about all aspects of supernatural phenomena, there may be, Craig and I might not see the same on things. And certainly when it comes to a lot of Eastern philosophies, Craig's much more versed and much greater student of that than I am. But because something doesn't have just because we're unable to explain something doesn't mean there isn't an explanation. And I think it's the excitement is opening up your mind, listening to different people's views on it. Because I've met Christians, I've met Muslims, I've met people of all sorts of different faiths who fascinated me, who really, really fascinated me and kind of inspired in many ways as well.
I think a lot of problems is the laziness of some spiritual seekers. They want to be told what to believe. They want to be told what to do. They want to be told and they want to be told what the truth is. But the thing is with truth, and I think all the great teachers of all the great religions says, you must know the truth for yourself. You must understand it, you must realize it. First you might seek it intellectually and morally and so forth, and finally you realize it. You have the epiphany, you have the enlightenment, whatever we want to call it. And I think this is part of the problem, is people can get so very spiritually lazy, and the only time they get animated with these things is at funerals and times when they're faced with critical illnesses and things like this, or major life challenges. And surely the best time to be seeking is when your mind is clear and when you've got a peaceful mind, not when you're threatened by death or by illness or by crisis of some sort. Okay, well, I think what I'm going to do now, actually, because I'm going to finish the recording here, so I'm just going to say goodbye to everybody for you on YouTube, and then I'm going to ask each of you who want to sort of open it up a bit more personal level. You can always then ask anything on a more personal sort of basis of things. I'm not saying we're going to give readings or anything, but I just say anything that's a little bit sensitive, or we can talk a little bit more freely than we might do if we felt it was being recorded. So I'm just going to say goodbye to everybody that's joined us from YouTube. Thank you for joining us. And if you would like to join in these Zoom sessions, then do become a patron and help support this channel. And we'll see you next time. And meanwhile, I'm going back to our patrons now.